about being a defendant in Nuremberg 2.0, sir? Good luck testifying to being a mass murderer, sir. I really look forward to it. You guys happy to work with this film? All that milestone items, all those part explosions of the EUA products that were never FDA approved.
Your grandmother's dead because of you.
28. Traitor. Did this.
We're coming for you. Legally, morally, and ethically to the max. That goes for your staff as well.
The Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic will come to order. I want to welcome everyone this morning. Pursuant to Committee on Oversight and Accountability Rule 7D, members of the committee may participate in today's Select Subcommittee hearing for purposes of questions. At the discretion of the chair and pursuant to an agreement with the Committee on Energy and Commerce, the chairman and ranking member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, Mr. Morgan Griffith and Ms. Kathy Castor are permitted to participate in today's hearings for the purposes of questions and give 3-minute opening statements. Without objection, pursuant to Clause 4A, 3A of House Resolution 5 and Clause 2J, 2C of House Rule 11, the chair may recognize staff of the Select Subcommittee for questions for equal periods of time not to exceed 30 minutes. Pursuant to Rule 7D of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Moskowitz, members of the full committee, may participate in today's hearing for the purposes of questions. I would like to remind members that the issues we are debating today are important ones the members feel deeply about. While vigorous disagreement is part of the legislative process, members are reminded that we must adhere to established standards of decorum in debate. There is a reminder that it is a violation of House rules and the rules of this committee to engage in personalities regarding other members or to question the motives of a colleague. Remarks of that type are not permitted by the rules and are not in keeping with the best traditions of our committee. The chair will enforce these rules of decorum at all times and urges all members to be mindful of their remarks. Finally, without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Fauci. First, I want to thank you for your decades of public service. You served your country through multiple epidemics, pandemics, and health crises. I do want to say I'm sorry about the threats that you have received. As someone who's been shot at and received threats as well, my heart goes out to you. This should never happen in America. Regardless of any disagreements we may have, you chose to serve, and I want to extend our appreciation and gratitude. I want to thank you publicly for working with our Doctors Caucus during Operation Warp Speed and the time you spent with us and Dr. Collins. I also want to thank you for your willing cooperation with the Select Subcommittee. You have voluntarily sat for more than 14 hours of testimony and are appearing voluntarily today. This is more than we can say about other witnesses we have called, and we appreciate it. Dr. Fauci, we're here to investigate the COVID-19 pandemic and to explore lessons learned, positive or negative, and to better prepare for future pandemics. Simply put, America cannot move forward, though, without looking back. We must know what went right and what went wrong in order to best ingrain proficiencies and remedy deficiencies. In 15 months, the Select Subcommittee has sent more than 115 investigative letters, conducted 30 transcribed interviews, resulted in hundreds of hours of testimony, held, including today, 27 hearings or briefings, and reviewed more than 1.5 million pages of documents. We aren't here to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's not the intent. We are following the facts, holding wrongdoers accountable, and planning for a better, more prepared future. Beginning early in 2020, you became the figurehead of public health. There were drinks named after you, you got bobbleheads made in your likeness, you were on the cover of Vogue, throughout the first pitch at a Washington Nationals game. Almost overnight, you became a celebrity and a household name, in addition to being a public health official. Americans from coast to coast and beyond listened to your words, and this is where I think we could have done better. And this goes to both sides of the aisle. We should have been more precise. We should have used words and phrases that are accurate and not misleading. And we should have been honest, especially about what we didn't know. Dr. Fauci, I'm not a virologist, but I am a physician, and like most physicians, we are constantly learning, which is why we do continuing medical education, and we always seek new information. We learn new things based on new data, and we want to give our patients the best possible care based on new findings and improvements in science. At a time when you were prompting the proximal origin paper, whose focus was to, quote, disprove the lab leak theory, end quote, I was in lockdown, researching with another physician in Ohio to try and understand the pathology, the affected physiology, and what treatments worked, and even how to diagnose COVID before we had specific COVID tests. My friend even made a phone call to an infectious disease doctor in China looking for help. As well, during that time, we discovered the Barrick-Shih 2015 article on creating a chimera using gain-of-function type technology. While policy decisions should have been based on scientific data, some frankly were not. The burdensome 6-foot social distancing rule did not have sufficient scientific report. In your words, it just sort of appeared. Distancing made sense, but the 6 feet was arbitrary. Even Dr. Collins said he still hasn't seen any empirical evidence to support the 6-foot rule. A rule that shut down schools and businesses, a rule that will have negative ramifications for decades. As the pandemic wore on, more mandates also just sort of appeared. But the American public didn't get to see the scientific data to support these mandates. Americans were aggressively bullied, shamed, and silenced for merely questioning or debating issues such as social distancing, masks, vaccines, or the origins of COVID. Many Americans were willing to comply with the 15 days to slow the spread and understood the necessity of banning travel from certain countries in an attempt to slow down the virus. But many Americans became very frustrated when components of those 15 days stretched into years. And it should not have been the case that Americans were forced to comply with oppressive mandates when those who chose to illegally cross our southern border were not. Or when Governor Newsom or Governor Whitmer were throwing parties at nice restaurants. Not a good look. Americans do not hate science, but Americans know hypocrisy when they see it. Dr. Fauci, under your leadership, the United States health agencies adopted specific policy aims as a single dogmatic truth, without the benefit of debate, out of a desire for a single narrative. Dr. Fauci, you once said, if you disagree with me, you disagree with science. Science doesn't belong to any one person. I was never taught that science turns a blind eye to hypotheses. They serve to be proven or disproven, and done so with irrefutable facts, if able. It was interesting that you chose not to pursue an aggressive and transparent scientific investigation of both natural spillover and lab leak. We have been investigating both hypotheses. You testified before the Select Subcommittee in your transcribed interview that the lab leak theory was not a conspiracy theory. You embraced the proximal origin letter. It wasn't necessarily a full peer-reviewed research paper, but you embraced proximal origin letter and you shared it with the public from the White House lawn. You stated during your transcribed interview that you did not review published articles that considered a potential lab leak of COVID-19. This is especially concerning if the works in question were conducted at a more risky and less safe BSL-2 lab. Nevertheless, any dissent from your chosen scientific position was immediately labeled as anti-science. Anything less than complete submission to the mandates could cost you your livelihood, your ability to go into public, your child's ability to attend school. Families were thrown off planes and shamed when their 2-year-olds struggled to wear a mask. Children with disabilities lost access to therapy that they and their families depended on. Students were out of the classroom and told to attend school remotely, even when the science clearly demonstrated it was safe for them to go back in the classroom. This harmed low-income students the most. And how were single-parent households supposed to teach their own children and work at the same time? Dr. Fauci, you oversaw one of the most invasive regimes of domestic policy the U.S. has ever seen, including mask mandates, school closures, coerced vaccination, social distancing of 6 feet, and more. We've learned many lessons. Our early fear and confusion was understandable. COVID-19 was clearly a novel virus. Under your leadership, NIAID allowed disgraced characters like Dr. Peter Daszak to use millions in taxpayer dollars to conduct risky gain-of-function experiments in Wuhan, China. The actions of EcoHealth and Dr. Daszak call into question the integrity of NIAID's policies and procedures as a whole, as well as your role, Dr. Fauci, as NIAID's director. You did sign off on his research grant. We need to know why Dr. David Morans, your direct report for more than 2 decades, assisted Dr. Daszak in avoiding oversight and scrutiny and said that you were involved. Your senior advisor and seemingly your chief of staff repeatedly attempted to evade transparency laws to shield information from public scrutiny. We have senior officials from your office in their own writing discussing breaking federal law, deleting official records, and sharing private government information with grant recipients. The office you directed and those serving under your leadership chose to flout the law and bragged about it. Why did you allow your office to be unaccountable to the American people? You were the highest paid person in the government. This makes you more accountable to the people, not less. Dr. Fauci, whether intentional or not, you became so powerful that any disagreements the public had with you were forbidden and censored on social and most legacy media time and time again. This is why so many Americans became so angry, because this was fundamentally un-American. If I make a mistake, I answer to the people of Ohio who elected me and to my own conscience. When you and your agency made mistakes, Dr. Fauci, what happened? We all need to be held accountable. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, we were wrong. You took the position that you presented the science. Your words came across to so many people as final and as infallible in matters pertaining to the pandemic. But such rigid demands of an ideologically diverse people like Americans shattered public trust in American health institutions. Because I said so has never been good enough for Americans, and it never will be. It's built into the American spirit. We have a thirst for information, a drive for advancement. Americans were first in flight. We landed on the moon. We've cured diseases. You've been part of that. and we made innumerable discoveries and explorations that forever changed humanity. Americans do not want to be indoctrinated. They want to be educated. And they prefer to make their health decisions in conjunction with the doctor that they know and trust. To be successful, our federal public health institutions must be accountable to the people again. To be successful, our health organizations must do what they are supposed to do: protect Americans. I look forward to a robust and on-topic discussion. I thank you. I would now like to recognize Ranking Member Ruiz for the purpose of making an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Dr. Fauci, and thank you for being here. When I was named ranking member of the Select Subcommittee last February, I made a commitment to follow the facts and objectively analyzing the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. I made a promise to keep an open mind about how the pandemic started, because understanding whether the novel coronavirus emerged from a lab or from nature is essential to better preventing and preparing for future public health threats and to better protecting the American people. And as the origins of the novel coronavirus still remain inconclusive, I stand by these commitments to this day. But nearly a year and a half into House Republicans' extreme and chaotic majority, I believe we need to take stock of what the Select Subcommittee has accomplished and whether it has meaningfully improved our preparedness for the next public health threat in our nation. Under the guise of investigating the pandemic's origins, House Republicans have abdicated their responsibility to objectively examine how COVID-19 came to be, and instead weaponized concern about a lab-related origin to fuel sentiment against our nation's scientists and public health officials for partisan gain. They have done so with one particular public health official in mind, Dr. Anthony Fauci. And they have done so in an effort to deflect blame and anguish for the damage the pandemic inflicted on our society away from the former president, whose stumbling pandemic response, by some estimates, led to 400,000 unnecessary COVID-19 deaths, and on to Dr. Fauci, who worked tirelessly to stem the crisis. Over the past 15 months, the Select Subcommittee has pored over more than 425,000 pages of documents provided to us by government agencies, universities, and private citizens. We have conducted more than 100 hours of closed-door interviews with 20 current and former federal officials and scientists. And what we have found is the following. Dr. Fauci did not fund research through the EcoHealth Alliance grant that caused the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Fauci did not lie about gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. And Dr. Fauci did not orchestrate a campaign to suppress the lab leak theory. After 15 months, the Select Subcommittee still does not possess a shred of evidence to substantiate these extreme allegations that Republicans have levied against Dr. Fauci for nearly 4 years. Now I want to make something very clear. In the past month, the Select Subcommittee has held hearings where we have examined various serious issues of misconduct. In following the facts, Select Subcommittee Democrats uncovered troubling misconduct by Dr. Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance, including potential efforts to mislead the federal government about the nature of its work through the evasion of reporting and transparency requirements. And less than 2 weeks ago, we heard from Dr. David Morens about his flagrant violation of the Freedom of Information Act's transparency requirements and the potential destruction of federal records. Both Dr. Daszak and Dr. Morens deserve to be held accountable for betraying the public's trust. To hold them accountable is not anti-science. It is the defense of our federal scientific and research institutions' decades-long legacy of advancing the scientific enterprise to safeguard human health. But baselessly suggesting without evidence that these discrete instances of misconduct are equivalent to our nation's scientists and public health officials causing the COVID-19 pandemic, which has killed more than 1 million Americans and inflicted an immeasurable toll on our society, is also a betrayal of the public's trust, which each of us are stewards of as elected members of this body. Today's hearing comes at a pivotal moment for our nation's public health. With the darkest days of the COVID COVID-19 pandemic behind us, thanks to the Biden administration's leadership, we are now faced with a crisis of declining confidence in the very science and public health interventions that lifted our society from one of the most challenging periods in our nation's history. And as we look to the future, we find ourselves at a fork in the road. We can go down the path of fueling mistrust in the interventions that saved us, like vaccines, masking, and social distancing, and the public health officials like Dr. Fauci, who worked tirelessly and with extremely limited and evolving information about a novel virus to save lives during one of the greatest crises of our time. Or we can work constructively on the forward-looking policies and solutions that we know are necessary to prevent and better prepare us for the public health threats that are yet to come. Since my first day as ranking member, I set out to take the latter path, the path of putting people over politics and prioritizing solutions to better prepare us for the next pandemic. And it has been my hope that Republicans would join Democrats in the forward-looking work that will better protect our constituents. Strengthening oversight of potentially risky research domestically and abroad is an essential part of this conversation, and so is closing pathways for zoonotic transfers of viruses in nature and investing in our public health infrastructure to ensure that when future viruses arrive, we are ready. When Democrats were in the majority, we made important strides in these objectives by passing the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, which strengthened the protections against undue influence in our biomedical research, improved training and transparency for the handling of select agents, paved the way for the interagency collaboration to fortify zoonotic disease prevention, invested in our infectious disease workforce, and enhanced our supply chain preparedness and ability to rapidly develop and deploy medical countermeasures. And ahead of today's hearing, more than 90 health and medical organizations, including the American Public Health Association, the American College of Physicians, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the Infectious Disease Society of America, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, and the National Association of County and City Health Officials wrote to the Select Subcommittee urging us to, quote, stand against efforts to weaken the ability of the nation's public health agencies to protect the nation's health, and to take additional action to fortify our nation's public health workforce and infrastructure. I seek unanimous consent to enter this letter into the hearing record.
Without objection.
As we sit here today, I have not lost hope that in the remaining months of the Select Subcommittee, we can work together to build on this legacy and make objectively examining the origins of the novel coronavirus a part of this forward-looking work. I stand by my commitments I mentioned earlier to take a serious, balanced look at all possibilities for the origins of COVID-19 pandemic. And I stand ready to work with every member of this Select Subcommittee on this critically important mission so that we can save future lives. And I believe I still have some time left. So at that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Raskin with the remaining time.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. Public health is a matter of urgent and comprehensive public concern. Under Donald Trump, when the COVID-19 pandemic began and spun out of control, we came close to becoming a failed state, which the political scientists define as a state that cannot deliver the basic goods of existence to its people. According to Dr. Deborah Birx, Donald Trump's own COVID-19 advisor, America unnecessarily lost hundreds of thousands of people because of the recklessness and indifference of Donald Trump and his administration. Now the people who brought you the political big lie, claiming absurdly that Trump won the 2020 election, which he lost by more than 7 million votes, now bring you the medical big lie, making the outlandish claim that Dr. Fauci was responsible for causing COVID-19. Using the Select Subcommittee as a platform for this disinformation, House Republicans now find themselves in the familiar position where their own investigation debunks their runaway political rhetoric. Just like the broader committee's impeachment drive proved only that there were no presidential crimes, much less high crimes and misdemeanors attributable to Joe Biden. The investigation of Dr. Fauci shows he is an honorable public servant who has devoted his entire career to the public health and the public interest, and he is not a comic book supervillain. He did not fund research to create the COVID-19 pandemic. He did not lie to Congress about gain-of-function research in Wuhan, and he did not organize a lab leak suppression campaign. Today, Dr. Fauci's testimony, along with the thousands of pages of documents and dozens of closed-door testimony provided to House Republicans as part of the COVID origins investigation, will dispel these hysterical claims and reveal that the people bowing down to a twice-impeached convicted felon who told Americans to inject themselves with bleach now want you to believe not only a big political lie, but a big medical lie, too. I hope that this committee will be able to correct all of the propaganda and disinformation today, and we will be able to actually return to what the good ranking member has said, which is an authentic investigation of the origins of the pandemic. And I will yield back to the gentleman.
And I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Griffith for a 3-minute statement.
Good morning. I want to again thank the leadership of this committee for including the Energy and Commerce Committee in this hearing. Dr. Fauci, the recent revelations that Dr. Morenz, a senior advisor, and your Chief of Staff, Greg Folkers, routinely evaded federal records laws, including the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, and those were a shock. That was a shock. I've been doing oversight now for over 14 years, or right at 14 years, and the scale of the effort to evade FOIA by some at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, has surprised even me. These men were among your most senior and trusted staff at an agency you led for nearly 40 years. They worked for you for decades. Your calendars show that you met with them multiple times a week during the pandemic. You co-authored dozens of papers with Dr. Morenz. He directly implicates you. Even the head of the NIAID FOIA office was apparently in on some of this conspiracy. And I know my colleagues on the other side love to say we're always talking conspiracy, but when the facts lead you there, whether you knew about it or not, when the facts lead you that your agency was involved in some form of a conspiracy related to COVID origins, we have to follow those facts. It is hard to believe that all of this occurred without your knowledge and or approval. In civil law, when one party has destroyed or refuses to produce evidence that's within its possession, a jury is allowed to draw an adverse inference that the information destroyed or not produced was unfavorable. Therefore, until we get a full accounting of all of the communications among NIAID's leadership, it's reasonable for us to assume that missing information would mirror the private doubts expressed by so many virologists and other scientists related to your public positions. While telling the public, the media, and Congress that COVID-19 almost certainly emerged from nature, experts you convened as a team privately worried that a research-related incident was a possible, if not the probable, origin of the virus. Dr. Christian Anderson even said in February of 2020, quote, "I think the main thing still in my mind is that the lab escape version of this is so friggin' likely to have happened because they were already doing this type of work and molecular data is fully consistent with that scenario." Further, while you and other NIAID officials were assuring us that the virus could not have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, NIAID didn't actually have an idea as to what the full scope of Wuhan's coronavirus research was, or even the trajectory of its gain-of-function research. Now, that may be because EcoHealth wasn't giving you the reports. I grant that. But this joint investigation has shown just how little oversight NIAID does of risky experiments involving potential pandemic pathogens. NIAID set up a system designed to greenlight potentially risky experiments while avoiding HHS department level review. The same program officers who act as advocates for their scientific area are responsible for assessing whether experiment is too dangerous. That creates a conflict of interest. I think that means that when an agency is taking the final approval, we ought to take that final approval away from the agencies like NIAID that fund it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Castor for a 3-minute statement, and I will oblige you an extra 30 seconds as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fauci, for your appearance today and for your decades of service to our country. During your 39 years at the helm of America's leading health research institute, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, you tackled some of the most serious health threats, including AIDS, Zika, Ebola, SARS-CoV-1, and COVID-19. Your leadership and service to Republican and Democratic administrations and all Americans saved countless lives and resources. We owe you a debt of gratitude. While the evidence to date points to COVID-19 having originated from an animal market in China, the Chinese Communist Party has blocked access to important information that could help confirm the origin of the virus. This committee should be doing more to fight for those answers, but instead has wasted significant time and taxpayer money fueling conspiracy theories and ignoring the importance of preparing for the next deadly pandemic. Some GOP members falsely claimed you secretly broke into CIA headquarters and coerced analysts. Others claimed that you committed crimes. America's adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran love it when Americans are divided and distracted. It provided fertile ground for the spread of misinformation about COVID-19 by our adversaries. And unfortunately, fringe far-right conspiracy theories have permeated even mainstream media outlets, and some Republican members of Congress have played along. I regret that many of the conspiracies have smeared you, Dr. Fauci, as you and our top scientists did everything to keep Americans safe during the deadly days of COVID-19. Over 1.1 million Americans lost their lives to COVID-19, and today it's still more deadly than the flu. As we learned from Zika and Ebola, the ways viruses are transmitted are not obvious at first, and the development of treatments and vaccines takes time. What you and your team did to speed the development of the safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine was remarkable. That fast timeline was only possible due to years of federal investment in the National Institute of Health and support for medical research in the United States. So one of the lessons learned from the pandemic is the need to continue to invest in medical health research in the US for cancer, for heart disease, for diabetes, but also to prepare for the next pandemic. We must learn from the past so that we can keep Americans safe. That's why Democrats have worked hard to update America's pandemic preparedness law, the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act, to shore up public health and make us more prepared to tackle the next pandemic threat. It's not too late for Republicans to join us and turn the least productive Congress in modern history into one where we are all focused on solutions for the American people to make our country safer and stronger. Democrats were able to prevent harmful rollbacks in medical research last year, and I urge my GOP colleagues to join us and move away from threatening and undermining American medical research at every turn. Public health threats are constantly emerging. In the past month alone, we have been tracking new strains and variants of H5N1, Mpox, and SARS-CoV-2. Dr. Fauci, I'm sorry for the personal attacks you have received and may have to deal with today. But while you are here, I want you to know that the vast majority of Americans appreciate your work over the years. I look forward to continuing to learn from you, to learn everything possible about how we can take the pandemic lessons learned and put them to use to help keep our communities safe and healthy. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. Our witness today is Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci was the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases from 1984 to 2022. And Chief Medical Advisor to President Joe Biden from 2021 to 2022. Pursuant to Committee on Oversight and Accountability Rule 9G, the witness will please stand and raise his right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. The Select Subcommittee certainly appreciates you for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witness that we have read your written statement, and it will appear in full in the hearing record. As requested, please limit your oral statement to 6 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 5 minutes, the light will turn yellow, and when the red light comes on, your 6 minutes has expired, and we would ask that you please wrap up. I now recognize Dr. Fauci to give an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Ruiz, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify. Prior to my retirement from federal service in December 2022, I had been at the NIH for 54 years and director of NIAID for more than 38 years. In those posts, I was deeply involved in the scientific and public health response to several infectious diseases outbreaks, including HIV/AIDS, pandemic flu, Ebola, and Zika. And so, under my leadership, we were well positioned to respond to COVID-19. For at least 2 decades prior to the COVID outbreak, we at NIAID had invested billions of dollars in research on mRNA technology and immunogen design, both of which led to the swift development of COVID vaccines. Less than 11 months after the identification of this new virus, safe and highly effective vaccines were widely available, an unprecedented accomplishment in the history of vaccinology that saved tens of millions of lives worldwide. I will now use my remaining time to directly address certain issues that have been seriously distorted concerning me. The first issue concerns my actions regarding the possibility that SARS-CoV-2 might have resulted from a lab leak. On January 31st, 2020, I was informed through phone calls with Jeremy Farrar, then director of the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and then with Christian Anderson, a highly regarded scientist at Scripps Research Institute, that they and Eddie Holmes, a world-class evolutionary biologist from Australia, were concerned that the genomic sequence of SARS-CoV-2 suggested that the virus could have been manipulated in a lab. I participated in a conference call the next day with about a dozen international virologists to discuss this possibility versus a spillover from an animal reservoir. The discussion was lively, with arguments for both possibilities. 2 participants have testified before this subcommittee that I did not try to steer the discussion in any direction. It was decided that several participants would more carefully examine the genomic sequence. After this further examination, several who at first were concerned about lab manipulation became convinced that the virus was not deliberately manipulated. They concluded that the most likely scenario was a spillover from an animal reservoir, although they still kept an open mind. They appropriately published their opinion in the peer-reviewed literature. The accusation being circulated that I influenced these scientists to change their minds by bribing them with millions of dollars in grant money is absolutely false and simply preposterous. I had no input into the content of the published paper. The second issue is a false accusation that I tried to cover up the possibility that the virus originated from a lab. In fact, the truth is exactly the opposite. I now quote from an email that I sent to Professor Farrar on February 1, 2020, quote, "Jeremy, I just got off the phone with Christian Anderson, and he related to me his concern about the furin site mutation in the spike protein of the virus. I told him that as soon as possible, he and Eddie Holmes should get a group of evolutionary biologists together to carefully examine the data to determine if his concerns are validated, and they should report it to the appropriate authorities. I would imagine that in the USA, this would be the FBI, and in the UK, it would be MI5. In the meantime, I will alert my US government official colleagues of my conversation with you and Christian and determine what further investigation they recommend. Let us stay in touch. Best regards, Tony, unquote. It is inconceivable that anyone who reads this email could conclude that I was trying to cover up the possibility of a lab leak. I have always kept an open mind to the different possibilities. Another issue is that of Dr. David Morans, who has the title of Senior Advisor to the NIAID Director, and who recently has been investigated for conduct unbecoming a government official. Naturally, given his title, a connection is made to me. With respect to his recent testimony before this subcommittee, I knew nothing of Dr. Moran's actions regarding Dr. Daszak, EcoHealth, or his emails. It is important to point out for the record that despite his title, and even though he was helpful to me in writing scientific papers, Dr. Morans was not an advisor to me on institute policy or other substantive issues. At NIAID, we had weekly executive committee meetings of the institute leadership and daily morning meetings of my immediate staff. And to the best of my recollection, he attended neither of these. Furthermore, his office is located in a different building from that of the NIAID director. Finally, in a majority staff memorandum of May 22nd, 2024, there is a statement, quote, Dr. Fauci may have conducted official business via personal email, unquote. Let me state for the record that to the best of my knowledge, I have never conducted official business using my personal email. Thank you for listening. I would be happy to address these and any other issues in the discussion period.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for as much time as I may consume for questions, with equal time being afforded to the ranking member. Dr. Fauci, February 1, 2020, you were on a call with Dr. Farrar, Dr. Collins, and other scientists regarding the potential that COVID-19 was engineered. Was CDC Director Redfield on that call?
No, he was not.
Okay. Dr. Fauci, you've said that you had to rely on virologists and evolutionary biologists regarding origins because you're not an expert. Is Dr. Redfield a virologist?
I believe he is. Yeah.
He is. Prior to the pandemic, NIAID awarded at least 3 grants via the New York Blood Center to Dr. Zhao Yusen. Are you aware of these?
I'm sorry, to Dr.
Yusen Zhao. Are you aware of those grants? Dr. Yusen Zhao. Your microphone is not on, doctor. Your microphone is not on.
I'm not familiar with that name.
Okay. Well, NIAID awarded at least 3 grants via the New York Blood Center to that scientist. He was a high-ranking Chinese PLA official and director of a lab at the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences. Does it concern you if U.S. taxpayer dollars are funding someone like this?
Grants that are submitted to the NIAID go through a very extensive...
Does it concern you? I'm not talking about the process
well, I don't
now.
know
Does it concern you that that U.S. taxpayer dollars would be going to someone who's a high-ranking Chinese PLA official? Yes or no?
I would have to know more about that, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
because I don't even know the person you're talking about.
Are you or were you ever aware that the U.S. State Department in 2005 issued warnings that the Chinese government was working on the creation of bioweapons?
I was not aware of that.
Thank you. Did you ever discuss the Chinese bioweapons program with anyone in the intelligence community?
I've never discussed the Chinese bioweapons program, to my knowledge, with anybody.
Before, during, or after the COVID-19 pandemic, did you speak to the FBI, CIA, DIA, or any U.S. intelligence agency concerning viral research of any kind?
What time frame are you talking about, sir?
I said before, during, or after the COVID-19 pandemic. Did you speak to the FBI, CIA, DIA, or any U.S. intelligence agency concerning viral research of any kind?
I can't give you the specifics of it, but back in the time of the anthrax attacks, we certainly had a number of briefings of by agencies that were intelligence agencies. I don't remember who they were. It could have been any of the above that you mentioned, about the possibility that there were bioweapons that had fallen into the hands of bad actors, i.e. terrorists, that might have been used potentially as a bioterror attack. That was at a time when we had thought that the anthrax
I appreciate that. I appreciate your expertise in that.
Well, that's the answer.
But did you at any time talk concerning viral research of any kind?
Again, I say that at the time that there was concern about the fact that Al-Qaeda may have been using or potentially using bioweapons, we had discussions with intelligence agencies about that possibility.
But not as related to, say, COVID-19?
Not to my knowledge about COVID. Now, but let me just make sure we get the facts. After the investigations began about COVID, I was briefed by intelligence agencies about possibilities of there being activities going on in different laboratories. I was briefed by intelligence agencies.
Thank you. Science is always open to debate, and it's a benefit. The science supported restricting travel from certain countries at the beginning of the pandemic. And after these orders went into effect, the president was called racist and xenophobic. Dr. Fauci, you said in your transcribed interview that you supported those orders. Dr. Fauci, were those orders racist and xenophobic?
No, they were not.
Thank you. The vaccine saved millions of lives, and I want to thank you for your support and engagement on that. However, despite statements to the contrary, it did not stop transmission of the virus. Did the COVID vaccine stop transmission of the virus?
That is a complicated issue because in the beginning, the first iteration of the vaccines did have an effect, not 100%, not a high effect. They did prevent infection and subsequently, obviously, transmission. However, it's important to point out something that we did not know early on that became evident as the months went by, is that the durability of protection against infection and hence transmission was relatively limited, whereas the duration of protection against severe disease, hospitalization, and deaths was more prolonged. We did not know that in the beginning.